introducing them to you. We have Carolina Plescia, who is an assistant professor at the Department of Government of the University of Vienna. She completed her PhD in the Department of Political Science at Trinity College Dublin and mainly focused on electoral behavior under mixed member electoral systems. And her main research interests are comparative electoral behavior, coalition governments, representation, and research methodologies. Good morning, Carolina. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Then we have Eleonora Poli, also the co-organizers from the IAI. And she's a researcher at the same institute, and she's working on research projects dealing with the EU economic policies, the political and institutional implications of the Eurozone crisis. And now maybe we can also add the COVID-19 crisis, Eleonora, to this short view of yours. The political and institutional implications of the Eurozone crisis, Euro role in the regional conflict resolution. She also holds a PhD in political economy from City University of London. And we are very happy to have Eleonora Poli also with us. Good morning, Eleonora.
Hello.
Hi. And we have, last but not least, clearly, my colleague from the board of TEPSA, Nicoletta Pirozzi, who is also the head of program on European Union and institutional relations manager at the IAI. She works mainly on EU governance, policy and institutional developments in common foreign and security policy, civilian crisis management, EU relations with the United Nations and African Union. She also has an MS degree from College of Europe and a PhD from the Catholic University in Milan. Good morning. Thank you for being with us, Nicoletta. So, a couple of structural and organizational details. I think we are all now experts on virtual meetings and how to use Zoom, but just in case, if you have any questions after the initial interventions of our colleagues, you have two ways to do so. The first one is the chat option. As you see, you can type your question and I will try to formulate them to our participants. And for making this even more lively, you also have the option of using the raise hand button. So we will also give you the floor once the initial interventions are over for voicing your questions to the person that you would like to ask. So this is how we will proceed. I think without further delay, we can start with Carolina. Carolina, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation and thank you for the nice introduction. I'd like to just raise 2 or 3 points that I'm sure will be touched upon during the discussion. And I'd like to start with long-term trajectory of Euroscepticism in Italy, even before COVID-19. And I think this is useful to also set the entire discussion in a broader frame that is not just about the last 2 or 3 months. So for this reason, I'm gonna just share my screen with you. Perfect. I can then just put it in a full screen mode. Do you see it? Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So this is a graph that shows the long-term trajectory of a question that has been asked to a sample of Italians respondent by the Eurobarometer. This is one of the questions in the long term, available in the long term from the Eurobarometer, asking a sample of Italians, do you think that the EU membership of Italy is a good thing, is a bad thing, or neither good nor bad thing? And what is interesting to see is that Italy has recorded a very high support for EU membership around the 90s. There was an overwhelming majority of the population by then that said being part of the EU, so the membership of the EU, is a good thing. There was more than 80% of the respondents saying is a good thing. And in fact, it is well known, the fact that Italy was one of the most enthusiastic supporter of the European integration during the 90s. But the percentage of people saying that the EU membership is a good thing has started to decline sharply already during the 90s. What we see is that already at the beginning of 2000, we see that the percentage of those saying EU membership is a good thing was around 60%. The financial crisis, and this is a trend we see in a lot of countries, it's not just in Italy, there is only about half of the sample, half of the respondents that say, yes, being part of the EU is a good thing. So membership is a good thing. But this has continued to decline over time, and especially then during the period of the refugee crisis, where only less than 50% of the respondents say that being part of the EU, so the EU membership, is a good thing for Italy. We see that the percentage of those saying neither good nor bad has increased, and even being a little bit above those who say that it's a good thing. So this clearly shows that this sense that this feeling, this perception of the Italian population that Europe is no longer solving the domestic problems is not something new. It's not something it's just today with the COVID. This is a long-term trend that we have observed since decades now. And the perception, in fact, this sort of like disillusionment, if you allow me to say it this way, disillusionment about the EU capacity to actually address and solve the domestic issues that had already occurred during the 2000s. And that's why it is important to sort of like look at this long term to understand this sort of disillusionment towards the EU, especially now today, where the recent public opinion data, in fact, shows that a lot of Italians, many Italians, think that Europe is not really solving the problem, but it might be a problem in itself. It was like this during the the refugee crisis, and it seems to be the case also today. Of course, the interesting question is what will be the long-term repercussion of the COVID-19? Will this trend continue to these downward trends of those who think that being part of the EU is a good thing? Will this continue to decline or not? Will stop now this at around this 40%? And of course, the second question is, what is the role of parties in all these public opinion trends? Because we know that parties have an essential role, yeah, in not only not in influencing, but in shaping to some extent also public opinion. We have to also consider the fact that parties in government and parties in the opposition usually use Europe in a different manner, as the rhetoric towards the EU has always been different from the parties in and out of the government, because the parties in government have this role of responsible actor, and the parties in the opposition have this role of actually attacking the government, attacking the EU. But what we are observing right now is a sort of also for the government taking a negative stance or negative attitude towards the EU, asking for help and not so much receiving it. So before giving the floor to Eleonora, what I'd like to sum up and saying, we see this perception of this Euroscepticism growing even a little bit more during the COVID crisis, but it is important to understand that this is not completely new. There's been a growing disillusionment towards the EU in Italy, and this was since at least the 2000s. So, but I'll pass the words to Eleonora that will also look more into the party situations and trends.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Actually, this is very important, the understanding of this long-term trend, at least since the beginning of the 90s, to have a broader perspective on what is going on right now. And thank you also for introducing the role of the political parties and all this debate on blame shifting and how to shape public opinion regarding that. And before giving the floor to Eleonora, I would like to also introduce the question, what part of asking for help from the EU or admitting that this crisis cannot be handled alone, which is the case of Italy, it's also the case of Spain basically, is blame shifting? Which part of it is the core reality and that requires solidarity from the other partners in the European Union? I think it is important in this COVID-19 crisis to discriminate between basically the responsibility sharing or blame shifting with the European Union when it's done by the governments. But I'm sure there will be opportunities to get into, dig into these issues further. Without further delay again, Eleonora, floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Ilke, for introducing this. I think, yes, there is a strong connection between the current crisis and the rise of Euroscepticism, as Carolina was properly highlighting. Yes, Euroscepticism is not over in Italy, and much of the success of major Eurosceptic parties in Italy will depend on how basically the current government will be able to face the crisis. So the effectiveness of the easing of the national lockdown, the effectiveness of economic reforms, how much liquidity basically the government will be able to deliver to companies, but also, and most importantly, how the government will be able to negotiate, what kind of solidarity basically the government will be able to negotiate with the European Union. So the recovery plan will play a fundamental part in that. If we want to provide a picture of Euroscepticism in Italy now, we should talk about, first of all, the role of Salvini. Salvini is the leader of Lega, which is one of the most Eurosceptic party, not just in Italy, but in the European Union itself. Salvini basically was part of the previous Italian government, which basically collapsed in August 2018 because Salvini attempted a sort of coup d'etat, basically. He tried to, he basically presented a motion of no confidence against the Prime Minister Conte, and he was trying to trigger a snap election, but his maneuver did not work because in the parliament, parties found a new majority, and we have now a government led by the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement. Even the Five Star Movement was considered a Eurosceptic or Eurocritic party, but it has become more institutionalized, abandoning many of the anti-European issues, such as, for instance, the idea of abandoning the euro. It doesn't mean that the Five Star Movement is now pro-European, but is not so radically against the European Union. Salvini and Lega basically went from having around 34% of consensus among the Italian citizens to 28% today, which is still more than the Democratic Party and the Five Star Movement. The Democratic Party has around 20% of consensus and the Five Star Movement around 15%. But at the same time, if you look at the consensus the government is having, the same government, formed by these two parties, but actually it has around 65%, 65%, which is very high. It's true that this consensus has been building mostly during the coronavirus crisis and is now decreasing, but still it's a lot. What happened? Why Salvini and other Eurosceptic parties such as Brother Italy are not performing as they used to be? Well, first of all, let's put it this way. While Salvini and Lega are losing votes, the other Eurosceptic party, the Brothers of Italy, led by Giorgia Meloni, which used to be a sort of fringe party, is now becoming much bigger. It has around 40% of the consensus, and it has doubled basically its support since September, October 2018. And this is because many of the voters that used to support Salvini are now voting for the other party. What happened? Basically, there are three different elements that I would like to underline. First of all, Conte, the Prime Minister Conte, acquired the role Salvini wanted for himself. So he became, during the charismatic leader, able to lead the country even without consulting so much the parliament. This was what Salvini wanted for himself. Secondly, Salvini lost many of his arguments because, for instance, the migration issues became secondary. And you have to consider that migration crisis was basically the main argument Lega used to create an enemy and acquire consensus among, the Italians. And third, what I think is that there is a sort of internal battle within Lega itself. If you look at regional government in Italy, you will see that the majority of regional government are led by Lega and right-wing coalition. But in Lombardy, for instance, Lega has been performing quite badly. Like the regional governor has not been able to face the crisis as well as in other regions. On the other hand, you have, for instance, Veneto with Governor Zaia, which is also a Lega politician, which is performing quite well. And Veneto is becoming a sort of model, not just in Italy, but also in many other European countries. So there might be an internal competition between Salvini and Zaia, who is actually having 45% of the consensus, more than Salvini within, the legal voters. So, Salvini might be substituted by someone else because it's not considered a winning leader anymore by many of the voters. And this winner factor is fundamental because the majority of right-wing voters or populist voters, they vote for a party because they believe the leader is a sort of charismatic father able to lead basically the people, which are the good people. And Salvini is not embodying this role anymore because he lost the first battle in August 2018 when he was not able basically to win the government. And now is losing again because many legal regional governments are not basically performing well. At the same time, is not considered as authentic as it used to be. And is also linked to the fact that other parties are gaining vote. For instance, Brothers of Italy is gaining vote because Giorgia Meloni is more authentic than Salvini. Giorgia Meloni has been the same leader in all the crises, during all crises. She hasn't changed much arguments, and she has always presented herself as the same leader, while Salvini tried to change his rhetoric too many times, and also his outfit, which is also an important part if you consider, the dynamic between, behind, populist party and populist propaganda. So authenticity is more important than basically reality and truthfulness. And Salvini is not embodying these two elements anymore. What happened in Italy? Well, Euroscepticism is not over. The majority of the Italians are still not trusting the European Union. And this trend might become even worse according to what the government will be able to perform. For the moment, there is need to push forward economic reforms and economic plans able to deliver some kind of help to the majority of Italian companies and enterprises. Consider that the GDP is going to shrink. We are already in a recession and the economy might contract at 9.1% by the year. This is going to be the worst recession since World War II. So if the European Union and European member countries will not be able to deliver proper answer to this crisis, it is sure that Italy will not only become much more Eurosceptic, but we might even have a Eurosceptic government, a full Eurosceptic government leading the country. And this is going to be bad not just for Italy, but for the European Union itself, considering that Italy is one of the funding countries and also is one of the main economies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. Just one remark. We weren't able to see you in... right now you're back. Your camera was frozen, but I think that the issue is...
Sorry, I think the connection was not really good. I'm sorry.
But we heard you and understood you perfectly, so that's the important part. Thank you very much for putting some insights on COVID-19 and Euroscepticism, and for connecting Euroscepticism to strong leadership, because I think this is a very important phenomena. It is like very much also connected to personalized policy making, both in the nation arena and also in foreign policy. We have various different cases, starting with the White House, actually, in the world right now, and it is also very important to connect the phenomenon of Euroscepticism to the style of leadership that is taking place. I also took note took note of all the reasons that you have provided on the fold of Liga, but also your comments on that the Euroscepticism is not going anywhere, but is basically moving votes towards another party, which is also interesting. I'm sure once that Nicoletta also introduces her points, we will have further time to think about it. Nicoletta, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ilke. So in my intervention, I will focus more on the current situation in Italy, in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic and prospects for the future concerning the Eurosceptic trends, which have been highlighted already by Carolina and Eleonora. In order to understand what is happening in Italy, it is important to, first of all, look at the numbers. And here we find that Italy has paid a particularly heavy toll in terms of both human lives and impact on growth. In terms of human lives, we're talking about more than 30,000 deaths. Italy is the third country in the world for a death rate according to the official data, after US and UK, and just before Spain, France and Brazil. And in terms of impact on growth, Eleonora has already anticipated it. We're talking about minus 9.1% on annual GDP for 2020, according to the projections of the International Monetary Fund, and even worse, according to the European Commission forecasts, which were just released, minus 9.5% on annual GDP for 2020. So you can understand that in this situation, the impact on popular support for European institutions was quite heavy. As Carolina said, this is a long-term trend which was in any case exacerbated by the current crisis. At the moment, only 30% of Italians have confidence in the European Union. 67% think that being part of the European Union is a disadvantage. And in a shocking poll that was released only 3 weeks ago, it came out that Italians now consider China and Russia as the friendliest countries in the world, while Germany and France, followed by UK, tops the list of Italy's enemies. So we are confronted with a very difficult picture. What exactly went wrong? A first element is, of course, the growing sense of insecurity, which was triggered by the pandemic, and the numbers speak for themselves, which did not find adequate response at European Union level in the perception of Italian citizens. And actually, if we look at the facts, we can agree on the fact that the reaction of the European Union institutions at the very beginning of the crisis was quite slow and tepid. And in fact, this led later on the president of the European Commission to apologize with Italian citizens for not having showed enough support for the emergency going on. There was also a very dubious declaration by Christine Lagarde at the very beginning of the crisis concerning the intervention of the European Central Bank, concerning the limits in terms of stabilization of the spread effect on Italy's debt, and so on and so forth. So it is true that at the beginning, the lack of presence of the EU institutions was felt quite heavily by the Italian citizens, while other countries, first of all, China and also Russia, were very active in their so-called mask or COVID propaganda. And this is the second very important element to take into consideration in the current situation, the fact that Italy was targeted by massive disinformation campaign, especially by the Kremlin and Beijing. We can recall the Kremlin's campaign aimed at making the US responsible for the crisis. And we have seen also tanks going around Italy, I mean, going from Rome to Bergamo to offer help to the most affected areas in the north of Italy. And on the other side, China, in particular, China's attempt to discredit the European action by countering it with the benevolent actions from Beijing. So this is the situation. And now what can get even wronger in the future? Which are the main elements that we have to take into consideration? Of course, as Eleonora already mentioned, a prolonged recession in the Eurozone would add to the politics of Euroscepticism in Italy, which has gained momentum over the past decade, especially in all the countries that were affected by the previous economic and financial crisis and which are still recovering from the last crisis. So Italy, again, together with Greece, Spain, and other countries. The political consequences in Italy would be, on one side, the collapse of the current fragile coalition government, and on the other side, the rise of the electoral support for traditional Eurosceptic parties. So, of course, the League, Fratelli d'Italia, but also Five Star Movement, which has not decided yet which kind of approach they want to take concerning the European Union. What can we do to avoid this scenario? I would say that there are three priorities to be taken at national and European level, in the economy, in terms of democracy, and in terms of communication. I'll try to be very brief, but we can expand on it during the Q&A. On the economic side, of course, there is a need to, for national government to invest finally on much awaited structural reforms. And I think this crisis can be an opportunity in some respects, for example, in terms of digitalization of the public administration, which is one of the main problems in the country, and also the regularization of undeclared work. There is an ongoing debate in Italy, especially targeting migrants at the moment, and this could be also a trend for the future. At the European Union level, of course, we're all waiting for the details of the new recovery fund and the interventions that will be taken in the EU budget to face the huge economic and social consequences of the pandemics. On the side of Italy, what we expect is that this recovery fund will be activated as soon as possible, possibly connected to the European Union budget, and that resources will be allocated mainly through grants versus loans, which has been the current debate within the Eurozone. And these funds will be allocated mainly to most affected areas in the European Union. Of course, a lot will depend on the final result of the determinations in Brussels. Second very important element is to invest on democratic participation, try to improve as possible the participation of citizens in the debate concerning the European Union and enlarge the European Union public space. And here again, we have an opportunity in front of us, which is the Conference on the Future of Europe, which in any case will have to be readjusted to the new reality in terms of both topics to be addressed and methodology. In particular, we have to ensure that this conference, this consultation will be open to all European citizens and their representatives at all levels, from the local to the European levels, and as much as possible to allow for a transnational debate, a truly European debate on institutional and policy choices. Final point, again, we can go deeper in the discussion. I think that it is necessary to have a strong investment on strategic communication at the European Union level against foreign interferences and disinformation. We have seen this playing at national level, but also at European level. And it is time for the European Union to take adequate countermeasures for these foreign interventions. So just to sum up, I think what is at stake is really the resilience of the European Union project, which lies in the prospects of Euroscepticism in Italy. And we really have to work against the fragmentation of the Eurozone and the European Union as such by counterbalancing the trends that we have witnessed in the last years and particularly in the last months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. I think this was very interesting, and also bringing the issue from national arena to the international arena, and underlining the role of China, Russia, and mask propaganda or mask diplomacy, because I think this is also another question that we should introduce. I find it very interesting that we have this debate also on the table, and also introducing like 3 important steps and connecting it to the European Union, and what could be done by the European Union is very, very important right now. If I would like to connect it to, then I have already questions on the chat, so I will start like framing them to our speakers. But it is, while you were talking, I was always comparing it to Spain, because it's the second most affected, even in the number of cases, it's even higher than in Italy. And what is different than Italy is the historical pro-European attitude, because when we look at the Spanish trajectory since the transition to democracy, we have, even by analysts, titled as naive pro-European attitude. And with this crisis, with the COVID-19 crisis, we see an intention of Europeanization of national debate, not necessarily in the form of blame shifting, at least my perception is not that way, but asking for clear burden sharing. because it started as a solidarity debate in Spain in the beginning of the crisis, but it has connected very much to we are in this ship together, we will swim together or we will drain together. So it was basically the framing of the debates in Spain. So it is very interesting also to compare these cases where Veronica is basically asking a question on that possible comparison between Spain, Italy, and Greece. I think I will start forming the questions, and then like after 3-4 questions, I will open the floor again in the same order. So please feel free to pick up any of the questions that are asked and answer them. So the first one is from Veronica on this discussion between the differences Spain, Italy, and she's also naming Greece, but I think Greece kind of in a different side right now, because the crisis arrived kind of later to Greece, and the Greek government was quick to respond in that regard, and the situation is less intense than Italy and Spain. But I will form the question on the differences between Spain and Italy. And then we have one question from Rea asking or stating, well, better said, that China has no real interest in weakening the EU. Quite the contrary, both entities need to uphold multilateral institutions and need to strengthen the system on international relations. I think this is mostly to you, Nicoletta. If the acts of mass governance, mass diplomacy, propaganda is intentional to weaken the European Union, or not necessarily it's the case. And the second question is on the European Central Bank, and mainly stating the German Constitutional Court decision and naming it as quite disruptive, and connecting it to bolstering populists in various countries, naming Germany and Poland. Maybe it could be a question for you, Carolina. What are the role of these decisions that are, in this case, given in a national court on boosting further Eurosceptic sentiments in different countries? I will, I think, state one more question, but I have already 3 here. First of all, a comment from Ciaran saying that this is that delighted to see that all female panel. And the question is, if there was one measure that you would introduce that would reduce Euroscepticism, what would it be? So thank you very much for this reform question as well. I'm going to read the last one, and I'm opening the floor. Okay, we also have the Q&A part. Structural reforms are crucial and have been necessary since ever, says Alessandra Ricci. How realistic is it to realize them now within the short time frame when everyone wants to go back to normal, and normal being before the corona crisis? Maybe it is also convenient to state that what was the situation regarding the economy and the politics of Italy before the corona crisis, because I think Italy also has been very much on the headlines on the possibility of an economic collapse, on the intentions of going out from the euro, etc., etc. So I think following Alessandra's question comment, it would be a good idea to formulate the situation or picture the situation also before the COVID-19 pandemic. I think I will go to the panel in the same order. So Carolina, Eleonora, Nicoletta, and then we will have another round of questions because we have so many. So brief answers would be very much appreciated. Floor is yours, Carolina.
Yeah, I perhaps can start with the question on the comparison between Italy and Spain, and because it is absolutely true that the long-term trajectory in Spain has been, I hope you can see my screen, but basically what I'm showing you is the same graph I showed you for Italy. I'm showing this for Spain, and you can see that Spain has also started in the 90s in a very high percentage of people, 80%, so overwhelming majority, thinking that membership in the EU is a good thing. There's been, however, also in Spain a sharp decline, but has been up and down a little bit. And what is interesting, I think, is that the economic crisis has had also in Spain an influence of decreasing the percentage of people having this warm feeling towards the EU. But the main difference is in the last years between Spain and Italy, because in Italy there's been a sharp decline of those considering the membership a good thing. We don't see this in Spain. And what the difference from the 2015 to May 2019, because this graph stops in May 2019, is that is the immigration, is the big topic of immigration, of the refugee crisis that has this sharp difference between Spain and Italy. Italy had a massive issue then in 2015. That's exactly when the support for the Lega Nord, for the League party skyrocketed. We don't see this in Spain, and that's why Spain has approached the COVID situation with a sharply different initial support for the EU. So Italy has sort of like reached the COVID situation with already a much lower support of this membership towards the EU. That's the main difference with Spain. I suppose that's what distinguishing Spain from Italy. And then Greece might be, I don't have unfortunately the graph for Greece, but I suppose, and I can speculate that the main problem in Greece is the economic crisis, which has been even harder, together also with the immigration crisis. So Greece can be even, the situation in Greece can be even worse than we actually see in Italy. Do you want me to pick up another question, or then we go in a sort of order?
No, as you prefer. Please answer any questions that you see fit, and then we will move to Eleonora and then finalize this.
Exactly. So in terms of public opinion, there was also this very important question about this recent so the intervention of the German Constitutional Court, and what kind of like repercussion this might have in terms of public opinion in Italy. And I think, I mean, I don't have the data to see exactly the effect on public opinion, but it is true that other data shows that now Italians feel that Europe is not a powerful actor, is not able to give answers, and might not have the power to act upon the crisis that we're facing. And this type of intervention by national courts can actually even make this even worse, yeah, because it's a matter of power of Europe versus the national government versus the national courts, and how the EU is able. Yeah, so is it powerful enough to help, and is powerful enough to also require solidarity from other countries? Because there is a big question of solidarity, and I think both Eleonora and Nicoletta touched upon this aspect, very important aspect of a sense of lack of solidarity from the better off countries. Of course, this is in the eyes of the Italians and the Southern European countries especially. So I expect that the situation is not probably the best to have national courts to even stepping in and trying to make Europe even less powerful. So judging the putting in question the authority of the EU might not be a very good indication for the public opinion that is already quite tepid towards the EU in general.
Thank you very much. Eleonora?
I hope you can see me now. Sorry for before. I didn't realize that the video was off, but I think I had a problem with internet connection. So I agree with what Carolina just said. If I can add something, is that the rise of Euroscepticism in Italy is also linked not just to populist or Eurosceptic parties, but also to a sort of use of the European Union as a scapegoat, also by traditional parties. If you consider Berlusconi, Forza Italia, when he was in the government, but also Renzi, Democratic Party, often have been using the European Union as a scapegoat for everything that didn't work or was not very well accepted by the public or the society. So this use of the European Union as, the main cause of the problems, which is not just an issue in Italy, but I think is well shared by other European member countries, is also one of the reasons why in Italy we have a decreasing trust in the European Union. This is very important because consider that Italians used to trust European institutions more than the national ones. How to reduce Euroscepticism? Well, Euroscepticism is not negative per se, it's just a social sentiment that, highlights a trend in the society. And people are Eurosceptic in Italy, not just because they just woke up today and they don't trust the EU anymore, but because they don't see the importance of the European Union in their daily lives. What the European Union and member countries mainly should do is to decide what kind of European Union they want. Because it's evident that this kind of European Union is not working for anyone. So to reduce Euroscepticism, my idea, of course, would be to have more Europe coming in the daily life of citizens. That means, having a stronger role, for instance, in transferring solidarity, in transferring economic aid, in transferring, financial resources, impacting the life of normal people, basically, in a positive manner. This is the only way to reduce Eurosceptic, because you can communicate better, yes, you can be more solidar, but if this does not translate into something evident in the life of citizens, this sentiment is not going to change. And again, the ruling of the German Constitutional Court goes in this direction. Again, we have a government or a national institutions, going ahead of the European Union and trying, to kind of delegitimize European institutions. This is not working, I think. And again, I think the main point here to fight against Euroscepticism is for government and national member countries to decide what kind of union they want for the future. Because the union that, it's united when everything goes well is not working, especially because things are not going well. So.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. Nicoletta, you have many questions also on, about the role of China and the international arena. The floor is yours.
Okay, so starting with China. I think that the campaign that China conducted during this crisis was very clear at the international level and also in Italy at national level. At the international level, the main attempt by China was to regain trust after the outbreak of the pandemic in Wuhan and after the news spread about an alleged silence by the China government to release adequate information at the international level. In the case of Italy, this was also one of the objectives, so restore a positive image of China and win hearts and minds of Italian citizens through a so-called, as I defined it before, mask diplomacy. And this was clear in the quick reactions by China in pledging support for Italy and for the most affected areas, but also on the communication campaign that was conducted primarily by the Chinese embassy in Rome and in Milan. So, I mean, we can speculate about the ultimate objective of China in terms of dividing and fragmenting the European Union, but it is clear that the main objective in this campaign was to have a strong ally in Europe, and Italy was the primary target of this attempt. Italy already in the past was considered by many European countries as a soft spot for Russian and Chinese propaganda. I think that during this crisis, we have seen that, in fact, there is an issue to take into consideration in both cases, Russia and China. And it is very important that national institutions in Italy and also European Union institutions in Brussels take these into careful consideration for the future. At national level, we have already seen a recognition of this problem and a change of attitude of the Italian government, which initially was very enthusiastic about helps coming from Russia and China, and almost silent about the support, which was quite substantial in any case, coming from European countries such as Germany and France, and from the European Union institutions. Now this approach was rectified by recent declarations by the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Prime Minister trying to underline how important the role of the European Union and traditional allies in Europe was during the crisis. Briefly on the impact of the rule by the Constitutional Court in Germany, I think it is very important what both Caroline and Eleonora said. I think it was good also to have a quite strong reaction on the side of the European Union institutions, the European Central Bank with a communique which took note simply about the rule of the court, and the European Commission reaffirming the preeminence of the EU law on national law. But I think in terms of Euroscepticism, the main impact of this rule will be seen in the future in terms of what impact this judgment will have on the policy of Germany, of the German government, concerning the quantitative easing interventions by the European Central Bank, which have proved, I think, crucial in the past and also in this crisis. Of course, if this rule by the Constitutional Court will change the approach of the German government and make it even more difficult to have this kind of ambitious policy by the European Central Bank, in that case, this could have also negative impact on the rise of Euroscepticism in Italy and other countries which rely a lot on this kind of quantitative easing policies. If I will have to name one measure to counter Euroscepticism, I would say personally Eurobonds, but I know that this is a quite controversial issue. I think this could have really been a game changer for the political discourse in Italy. So in terms of effect about the widespread feeling of distance of European Union institutions, such as symbolic steps taken by the institutions have been quite helpful. However, I am aware of the fact that this measure would trigger an opposite effect in some other countries, in particular the Nordic countries. So of course, I mean, we will have to find a compromise, but that's why I was saying that the ambition of this recovery fund will be particularly useful for the pro-EU propaganda in Italy. And very quickly, finally, on the structural reforms, about the questions how likely it is that we take these long-awaited measures right now. I know, I mean, there is a lot of uncertainty on this, but what I was pointing out is the fact that, I mean, in these weeks, we are really seeing a change of narrative and a change of attitude, at least in the two aspects that I mentioned before. So on one side, the approach to digitalization, smart working, which has been, I mean, something very present in the debate in the past, and now has been perceived even more as a necessity for Italy. And the other side, on the regularization of irregular work, we have already a measure taken by the government to regularize migrants for the summer season. We hope that this will be transformed in a more structural reform in the longer term, but at least what we can acknowledge is a change of narrative and attitude on these topics. So maybe a bit more hopeful than in the past.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. I already have like 8 questions to form, but just one remark so that you can also elaborate a bit further on that when it's back in on your turn. Do you think this regularization of irregular migrants, especially for the agricultural sector, I assume, no? Because the same debate is also in Spain. There are no enough people to work on the sector. Do you think it may have a long-term effect on attitudes towards migration? Can this kind of create a more positive image? Before I move further with the already asked questions, is there anyone who would like to ask her or his question via using raising hand? Because otherwise I'm gonna read the questions that were already posed. So if you have any questions that you would like to frame, please use the raise hand. So we have a question from Albert asking about the reopening of tourism. I think it's a very big debate in Italy and also in Spain, and how it's a great way to recover some part of the economic damage, but it's also a threat to public health. So what should be the stance on this, and what should be the role of the European coordination on that? Then we have 2 questions related to the economy, one from Georgie and the other one from Dismos Tennis. I'm sure I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but more or less. They're asking about the current dynamics of the economy between the European Union and Italy. Like, what is the state of economic relationship right now, and what is the perception of the package that was offered by the European Union? As Nicoletta said, the details of the recovery fund are not out there yet. It should be soon. But what was the perception in general? Maybe you could elaborate a bit further on the historical ghosts on European Stability Mechanism, how it was used, and connections of it to the previous economic crisis. I think the question goes a bit there, like the perception of these measures and these packages also connect very much to the previous crisis and the already existing economic tensions and crisis between Italy and the European Union. I have again one question from Roy about support for China. Maybe you could a bit go further. If the support for China, or perceiving it as a friend, is a long-term trend, or will be converted into a long-term trend, or it's basically the heat of the moment that you see help coming from China with the Chinese flags on them on television, and then yeah, China's a friend. So is it a longer-term trend, or it will be converted into a longer-term trend? And what could be the role of the Lega in converting this into a long-term trend? Okay. I have 2 more questions. I know there are so many, I know there are, again, like the last round, that pick up whatever you can and we go complementing each other. The last 2 are basically how we can explain that the EU is useful and it should be reformed, not destroyed. And basically that it very much connects to Axel's question, because what he's saying is that Germany is also helping Italy, no? We like bringing some of the patients to its territory, sending over protective gear and masks and health material. But we see Germany as a foe, while we are seeing maybe with the same effort, I don't have information to compare the efforts of China and Germany, but I'm sure they have been similar in this, but I'm sure you can provide further data. But Germany is perceived as a foe, while China is perceived as a friend, while both are helping Italy. So how can further arguments could be conveyed in favor of the European Union and its member states and the role that has been played by them? I think I will leave it there, even if we have one more question, and give back the floor to Carolina. As I said, you can pick up whatever you would like to answer and we go complementing each other. Carolina, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, I'm not an expert on tourism and the tourist sector, but one thing is everyone knowledge is the fact that tourism is a key, a vital sector for Italy. It's rather impossible that Italy will close off the border and for the entire summer, because tourism is so important. Just think about how many people just come to Italy for beaches, but for cities like Venice or in the Cinque Terre, etc. So it's rather impossible. The big question is whether it will be safe, yeah, for a flock of tourists to come to Italy. This is key. The next weeks will be key to this kind of developments. But I haven't seen the government really putting up measures for it. I think the government itself is waiting to see how the situation is, whether it is improving or not in the next couple of weeks. But there is a real possibility that tourism will not resume, not as normal, but not even in a fashion that this means that will hurt even further the Italian economy massively. So this will be a real problem for politicians to deal with after the crisis. I think it's interesting, the question about the agricultural workers and how this will impact immigration, because I think, Ilke, you're completely right in saying that it is possible that this will bring in a slightly more positive image of immigration in Italy, sort of like we need these immigrants. This I've seen in Austria as well, but also in other countries like the Netherlands and Belgium. Spain, as you mentioned, in need of people, not only from Africa or Middle East, but even just people from Romania, Bulgaria that come to work for the summer in several of the European countries. But it's unlikely that parties in Italy will try to send because what I want to mention is that the media and the party play a crucial role in shaping public opinion. And I'm wondering whether it is in the interest of parties, and especially the parties on the right, that leave out of support anti-immigration attitudes. There is no rational incentives for them to depict this immigration in a positive light. There is, so they will try to even move attention somewhere else rather than saying, oh, thanks God these immigrants are coming. It's very unlikely. I think party rhetoric will not be on that. I think, if anything, if the economy is doing really bad, they will try to have scapegoats like the EU, rather than, you know, looking at this the positive sides of it. Yeah, we have a lot of questions. Probably I will leave the floor to Nicoletta or Veronica for the other reform question. I think they know more than me on these points.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Eleonora, could we continue with you?
Yes. On the migration issue, maybe I will not be very popular in saying this, but I think that allowing migrants in coming regularly to Italy, working in the fields, will not be positive if those migrants are just going to be underpaid and to work with no rights, because that's what happened in the past. Even migrants coming from European member countries, such as Romanian, were basically slaves in the hand of farmers. And this will not play good, not just, you know, for the human rights issues, but also because many Italians might be willing to work in the fields now, but because they are facing competition for people that are more in need, so they can work even with fewer conditions, you know, they might, this on the contrary might be outrageous in the eyes of many Italians, you know, like, but seeing, you know, people coming from abroad just because they can accept less money or work in worse conditions because they are more desperate, this will not work will not be positive in terms of the migration argument. So fine, yes, let's regularize people. Let's make sure that we really need people from abroad. Even if we don't need people from abroad, I think, yes, we can regularize migrants, but then make sure that people working in the fields are treated regularly. And this is the main issue, because even in the past year, there were many reports that, you know, highlighted this very bad condition of people working in the fields for, you know, these temporary jobs. As far as reopening of tourism is concerned, I think, you know, there is no solution. We will have to live with this virus going around. So I'm not sure Italy will open borders. And even if Italy will open borders, I'm not sure people will come to Italy. Still, you have to consider that the big part of the pandemic is in Lombardy, in the north part of Italy. And there are regions in the south where the numbers are very low. Like, you know, southern Italy has been basically not even touched by the virus. There are like areas in the south that, you know, where, you know, the situation is very under control. So I guess, yes, tourism will reopen. There will be measures, you know, to control the spread of the virus. But again, I don't think people will travel a lot. Maybe, you know, Italians will travel, say in Italy, and the same will apply for the rest of Europe. As far as China and Lega, well, Lega has a very close relationship with Russia. So it might be able to do the same with China, but I don't see China taking a sort of global leader role in this new phase. It's true that the US is not there anymore, but it doesn't mean that China can replace the US in, you know, being the big leader. China is attempting to influence, like Russia, basically, Italian politics and European politics. And it is also quite successful in doing that, because it's more good in doing propaganda. You know, that's why, you know, for instance, the fact that Germany has been helping Italy a lot is not well known, because Germany did not have any interest in, you know, building a whole propaganda around that, you know, around the fact that, you know, it was taking COVID patients from Italy to basically Germany. Yes, there was not, you know, not a lot of energy were invested in communicating this, nor from Germany, nor from Italy, because of course, as I said, Lega is governing the majority of regional government, and there is no need for Lega regional government to highlight the importance of the European Union or European member countries in doing good actions, you know, in helping Italy. Again, this is part of Eurosceptic propaganda. The other question was how the European Union can be useful. I think this applies to what Nicoletta was saying. We need, you know, reforms that can be sold to the public. Corona bond or Euro bond would have been good for Italy. Now it's time to define what the recovery plan will be. And mainly, we need to transfer something to European citizens. That's the main thing, I think.
Thank you very much, Eleonora. Before I give you the floor, Nicoletta, there is one more question from Hannah directed to you directly. And this is also a question that I'm also asking myself for the example of Spain. Hannah is saying that how can we convince citizens to participate in activities or in brainstorming related to the conference on the future of Europe? She is saying that because they are basically hostile or hesitant to provide information or get into a process of making it better. But my question is, if I can connect it to a wider thinking, how we can convince citizens or bring these people into this debate and go beyond the usual suspects in the think tanks, universities, and these circles. No, that our life is passing by like this, thinking about the European Union and trying to find a better solution for the problems that we are facing. But how can you convince a northern citizen, maybe a Eurosceptic one, to also contribute to the process, a process like the Conference on the Future of Europe? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilke, and also to the very interesting questions that were raised by the participants. So very quickly, first of all, on the debate about the European Union economy measures in Italy, as you correctly said, we had some heated weeks of discussion in Italy concerning the European Stability Mechanism. I mean, the debate was trapped in a opposition campaign that was started by the opposition far-right parties, primarily League and Fratelli d'Italia, which basically evoked the ghost of the Troika several times as one of the unavoidable consequences of accepting the European Stability Mechanism in Italy. So there was this, heated propaganda against the choices of the government, and this was not helped by the fact that one of the parties which are currently in the government, the Five Star Movement, was one of the most loud opponents of the European Stability Mechanism in the past. So on one side, there was the government which tried to find an internal compromise on the position to be taken concerning the activation of the European Stability Mechanism to get most needed support to face the expenses connected to the COVID-19 emergency on one side, and then the attacks to the government itself coming from the opposition parties. Now that the European Commission has clarified that there are no conditions attached to the mobilization of funds under the European Stability Mechanism, that there will be no additional monitoring mechanism in place, that the only condition to be met is the destination of these funds that have to be used for the expenses connected to the response to the emergency. We noticed that the debate has calmed down. But in any case, it was really difficult to have a serious and rational discussion about what the European Union institutions were really doing to help European citizens and Italian citizens on one side, and what the Eurosceptic propaganda was trying to do to destroy this discourse. In general, I think it was, as for the economic and financial crisis, The fact that the most important decisions were taken behind closed doors by the representatives of the executives in the European Council and the Eurogroup did not help the perception of the citizens of a participatory union, and did not incentivize the democratic engagement of citizens itself. And that's why I was underlining the need for the future to make a step forward in terms of democratization at the European Union level, and also try to enlarge also the competencies and scope of supranational institutions in dealing with the needs and the priorities of European citizens. Then on China again, if this can be turned in a long-term trend, well, a lot will depend on the political decisions that will be made by the Italian government. Here, the central player is not the League, but the Five Star Movement, which was the party that made it possible last year to conclude this memorandum of understanding with China, which raised a lot of noise in Europe, even if in terms of substance there was little to blame, but of course the political message was quite worrying and clear. And again, in this propaganda and the effects of the propaganda during this COVID-19, a crucial role was played by the Five Star Movement within the government. So a lot will depend on the positioning of this party in the future, and how this could be counterbalanced by other political forces which are more inclined to foster traditional alliances within the European Union. And this, I think, will change a lot the debate and also the perceptions of the citizens in Italy. On the participation in the conference on the future of the EU, well, yes, this is a crucial question which we have been asking ourselves over and over, also at the IAI, at the Institute for International Affairs. So based on the experience we have accumulated in the last few years, it was important to establish partnerships with local constituencies which were able to mobilize people. For example, especially during the year in which we had this Eurosceptic populist government in 2018-2019, for us it was crucial to bring the discussion about the European Union in the peripheries of the big cities, in small villages, always together with recognized constituencies at local level. It could be the local association for migrants. It could be even the church. In some cases, we went to Naples, to one of the most disadvantaged neighborhoods of the city, hosted by a priest, which is particularly active in engaging citizens in meaningful dialogues. Or, for example, small theaters which were built by, organized by young people in peripheral areas of Rome, and so on and so forth. So I think the only way to go beyond, as you said, our, the usual suspects, our, usual circle of like-minded people, is really trying to foster these innovative, unusual partnerships. And maybe if we could use them to mobilize them also for the conference on the future of Europe, this could be beneficial. It means, of course, that that the European Union institution will have to work a lot with national think tanks or other institutions that have really the feeling of the situation in the country. Maybe this is an option to be followed.
Thank you very much. Actually, you have given very important examples and directions on how we should proceed on the conference of Europe as well. We have 9 minutes left. I have a couple of points that I have noted down. I would like to underline some of them and give the floor back to you for a minute. So you say that you're saying goodbye words and saying goodbye to our participants. One point that Nicoletta said was the word competences. I think we should have said that way early in this debate, because sometimes the European Union is blamed for things that it doesn't even hold the competences for. Clearly public health policy and border management were two of them, but also further steps in the debate requires very much consensus among the leaders. This is why we are seeing, for example, that was criticized by Nicoletta, but we are seeing further and further meetings between the Eurogroup, European Council. European Council met like 4 times virtually since the beginning of March. And we are seeing decision-making in a higher level that requires national, like member state governments to agree. So I'm not so sure if we will move forwards towards increasing the competences of supranational institutions or community institutions, or the other way around. We are seeing even a further intense role for the European Council, not even the Council, it's the European Council, the leadership level got even more enforced with the crisis we have been through all these years. And one more point that I have taken from Eleonora's contribution was that we are taking the European Union and the help that is coming from the European Union as granted. No, that Germany is helping because Germany is supposed to help, and there's no PR campaign around it, so it's not even perceived by the citizens. And then another country, be it China, be it Turkey, via NATO, be it whatever country, sends a couple of boxes of masks, and they are the real friends in the eyes of the citizens. So I am clearly seeing an issue of public opinion shaping there, but I would also remember or remind the comment that was given by Carolina, saying that if the political parties are not campaigning positively or not sharing also what is good with the European Union, because they mostly share the blame for the things that are not necessarily working in the national scene, but they are not sharing the positive things that are happening in the European Union. Veronica asked another question on the relationship between Spain and Italy and why the Eurosceptic parties are not mobilizing these sentiments in Spain. And I think this is one of the core differences. Clearly, we need to go, the differences between Spain and Italy are more than we think in the perception of political parties. That's a topic for another debate. But one core difference could be underlined is that Spain always puts the European Union kind of visible for the good things that have happened. If there's a bridge that was made via EU money, you would see a thing saying that, okay, this bridge, this metro station, this reform, that was done by the European Union. And you have always, at least this is my perception, you could always see some kind of positive framing for the EU, mainly because Spain was governed by one-party governments until now, and either by the socialists and Democrats or by the Christian Democrats, two political parties that had kind of a permissive consensus on the good that might come from the European Union. This is in general.
But
Ilke, yeah, I'm going to give you the, sure.
Sorry.
But I'm going to give you the word in
No. Yeah, I just want to mention in this regard, because I think what you said is really important, but one also has to take into account what were the main problems faced by Italy and what were the main problems faced by Spain, because Italy was in the middle of the refugee crisis. Yeah. And so Europe has had a much more important role to play, while Spain didn't face any immigration issue almost at all, was more like a domestic issue of like the Catalonia question, etc., where Europe was actually helping rather than. So I think it's very different. I think you're right. It's up for a totally different debate.
Carolina, why don't you just pick up from there, because Paul is telling me that we have just 5 minutes left, so just like a minute each to say goodbye to our participants. We can start with you, Carolina.
Okay. Well, no, sorry for interrupting. It's just that I wanted to stress that point. No, thank you so much for organizing this debate and for inviting me. I think this is the question of the role of Europe in the next couple of weeks and months is absolutely crucial. And we will all be following this very clearly. I want, however, conclude with probably a positive note. Europe has faced many crises before. This is not the first one, but this could be a major one. And the response of Europe will be crucial in how public opinion will evolve from now on. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Eleonora?
If I can add something, it's just a perception, but the perception is that, the role of Italy in influencing European policy is decreasing, while the role of Spain is instead increasing. So this is also linked to the different perception we have about the European Union. But of course, this is, my perception. Thank you very much to Ilke and to Paul for organizing this all-female panel. I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully there will be more. Thank you very much.
Very interesting, Eleonora. We should elaborate on that, but not here, not now. Nicoletta, the floor is yours.
Yes, Ilke. So my final recommendation will be just not to lower our guard concerning Eurosceptic phenomena all around Europe, and particularly in Italy, which has proved to be quite sensitive to this kind of propaganda on one side, and which is so important to keep attached to the European Union project. So I think this could be one of the priorities for the future. I also wanted to thank you very much for this opportunity, both TEPSA and you personally, Ilke. I think it was a very fruitful discussion surrounded by female colleagues, and thank you, and hope there will be further opportunities for us to discuss these topics. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nicoletta. I'm also very thankful to TEPSA and IAI for organizing this debate and inviting me. I think this is one of the debates that I had the most number of questions asked, and I wanted to frame them all. I hope I managed, but if we left any questions out, please do not hesitate to engage with us on Twitter. Maybe we can try to move this debate further. Clearly, I think the positive message that was given by our all-female panelists is the one we should take home, and we should clearly think about the European Union and work on the European Union, because the crisis also bring opportunities, and I'm sure that there will be further opportunities to discuss the future and work on the issues related to the European Union. And I also would like to underline that Italy is a very important member state, a founding member state, one of the biggest ones. Not that we also have a very big personal attachment to the Italian case, but in any case, I think that we should all think about the personal individual cases of the member states and try to introduce some of the feedback that is coming from the member states to the functioning of the European Union. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much for listening to this debate and for the great questions, and see you on the next virtual or hopefully personal debate in the future. Thank you very much.